Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you're all having a good day. This is a very special day, of course. This is Minecraft 1.19 update day, and I hope you folks enjoy dipping into the update if you're going to do that today. Now, I'm recording this ahead of time, so the update isn't out quite yet, and I won't really have time to upgrade my world and start making 1.19 content today. We're going to tackle that stuff tomorrow, hopefully. In the meantime, though, one of the things we want to do is prepare this world for the arrival of 1.19. And you don't really need to do all that much, because when you update the Minecraft launcher and it has the latest version, you can just open your world and it'll be in the new update already. All of the new blocks and stuff will be available to you. You just have to go out and find them. Going out and finding them can sometimes be a little bit difficult, though, because often when you have explored a world thoroughly, Minecraft won't generate any of that newer stuff closer to you, depending on how the features work, because in terms of mobs and stuff, we can expect frogs to start appearing in the swamps that we've already discovered, and we might even find a couple of other bits and pieces here and there. But when it comes to finding new biomes, for example, the Deep Dark biome and the Mangrove Swamp biome they're going to generate in this update, we need to make sure we are loading new terrain in order to do that. When the Mojang team publishes a fresh update, they don't want to overwrite anything that the player has already done, and that includes terrain that the player has already generated. No matter how long you have spent there, no matter how useless the terrain was, it's already part of your world, and so deleting that by producing new biomes and overwriting it could potentially damage something a player has plans for or has been working on already, so that's not the way the updates work. But that leaves us with the problem of how are we actually going to run into some of that newer content when it has to be potentially thousands of blocks away to generate? Well, in this case, we have a couple of community-made tools that are going to help us with that. And so today's tutorial is actually not going to take place in the Minecraft world itself, or it is for parts of it, but the majority of it is going to take place in an editing program that's going to allow us to remove chunks of the world. Now that sounds kind of scary. It sounds like you'll be leaving giant holes in your world, but that is really not the case here. When you delete terrain from Minecraft, the world will typically regenerate it the next time you visit those chunks. So effectively, you are making those chunks unexplored again, effectively. We'll get into that in just a second. For now, we're going to close the Minecraft Survival Guide world. I'm going to close this down and save. We're going to go to our single player menu here where I have some of my worlds. The other ones are all backed up in different folders when I'm not playing actively with them. But I'm going to click on the Survival Guide Season 2 world, I'm going to hit Edit, and I'm going to make a backup, because making backups is very important for this process. This is a destructive editing process, by which I mean any changes you make will be permanent. So we need to make sure we have a backup that we can revert to just in case we make any changes which are catastrophically bad for the world. And I'm going to intentionally make one of those changes a little bit later to show you the effects of what we're doing here. So I'm going to click Make Backup first of all. This is going to think about it because my world is very large, and we should hopefully in a second have a backup that we can keep hold of in case we need it. Okay, that backup took about 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, and it shows that my world is 3.8 gigabytes on disk, which is pretty large. What we're doing today is also going to be a neat way of trimming down the size of the world in case you need to transfer it to another PC or distribute it as a world download. That is one of the things that you can do. But for now, we're going to quit out of Minecraft entirely. We've got our backups, everything is saved safely, and in fact, I've made a second backup by going directly into my Minecraft saves folder and turning the Survival Guide Season 2 world into a zip file. So with our world completely safe, it should be safe to download a program which is going to help us edit sections of the world out. In order to do that, we're going to download this program. From Quirts on GitHub comes MCASelector. It's a very straightforward tool which, as the About section says, allows you to select chunks from Minecraft worlds for deletion or export. We're going to focus specifically on deletion today, but of course there are ways of exporting things if you just want to take a chunk out of your world and put it in a different one. We've got a variety of different things that we can do there, but for now, we're going to scroll on down here to a couple of links. This one leads you to a Windows Exe Installer, so a nice straightforward way to install stuff on Windows if you're running Windows. The version below is a jar file, kind of the same as the Minecraft jar file that launches Minecraft, but it does that through the Minecraft launcher, whereas this jar file is something that you'll need to launch from your desktop, and that requires you to have the Java runtime environment installed on your PC or Mac or whatever it is, so that you can open jar files as though they are executable programs. That's a little bit more complicated, so for now, I'm just going to download the Windows installer, assuming that most of you folks have Windows, and if you're not running Windows, you can probably do your own research about how you get the Java runtime environment. It's also worth noting that MCASelector supports versions as far back as 1.2.1, but it won't necessarily support versions that are currently in 1.19. It may be supported in future, but for now, 1.18 is probably the most recent versions of the world that you'll be able to do this with. So keep an eye out for updates for 1.19 in future. Querts has been really good at updating this in the last little while, but naturally we're doing this in order to upgrade our Minecraft 1.18 world to Minecraft 1.19, so we're going to be opening the 1.18 version of the world. So without further ado, I'm going to launch that setup program. It's giving me a setup dialog, and after it's done installing, we get the opportunity to launch it, and it'll also be an installed program that you can launch from your start menu or your desktop. Once MCASelector is open, we're going to go to File, Open World, and that's going to go straight to our Minecraft saves folder, which is where I have the 3 worlds that you saw on the single-player start screen. We're going to double-click on Survival Guide Season 2, and that's all we need to do. We now need to click Select Folder, and it will give us a dimension to select. We either want Survival Guide Season 2, which is our overworld, dim -1, which is the nether, or dim 1, which is the end. Naturally, we want to trim the overworld for this demonstration because a lot of the changes are happening in the overworld itself. And for that, we're going to click OK, and it will load an overview of my Minecraft world. And this is always kind of the wild part, because we get to see exactly which areas of our Minecraft world we've explored from a top-down perspective. As you can see, if I scroll in here using the scroll wheel, this is very definitely my spawn area. That's the storage building over there on the right-hand side. That's the area with the starter house. Our wheat field is back there. The sheep farm is right there. Like, all of this stuff seems very recognizable. And if I go down on the scroll wheel and I zoom out, you can see the area that I have explored around spawn. And suddenly the impact I have had on this world seems very, very small. But if we go north, you can see where the Guardian farm is up there. That is our ocean temple, well, our former ocean temple. It still kind of looks like an ocean temple from above, but that is the Guardian farm where we're now getting our prismarine drops. And further out, you'll be able to find different biomes and different places we have visited already. The more we scroll out, though, the more it becomes evident that there is a lot of area in this world that we have done absolutely nothing to. I'm going to give this a second or two to continue loading, because there is certainly a lot of area we've explored, and as soon as you notice the black areas bordering the outside of the world, those are things that we have not explored at all. In fact, the completely grayed out chunks, like this one here that I've just highlighted in orange, are the ones that I've never even been into, I've just been around. And the black areas are areas bordering on neighboring chunks that we've loaded some of the stuff in that region, but we haven't loaded the chunks there themselves. And it seems to be done loading now, so this is the Minecraft Survival Guide world, kind of looking like a weird pigman skull, actually, with the eyes and the nose there, the snout. Anyway, let's not worry too much about that now. We can see all of the areas that I have explored, and despite the fact that it looks kind of small right now, remember, when we zoom in to our spawn area, that's how small it is on the overall map here. We've explored a massive amount of space. In fact, each one of these squares on this grid now represents a Minecraft region. That's a 512 by 512 block area, basically 32 by 32 chunks, the scale of the second size up map. And if I click and drag this entire area, that's how many level 2 maps it would take to map my entire Minecraft Survival Guide world. It's a lot of maps. But if we zoom back in again, you'll notice that a lighter grid kind of overlays itself on the darker grid of region lines, and those actually represent the 16 by 16 chunks of the world. I can navigate around this overview of the world by using the W, A, S, and D keys on the keyboard. We can also use the arrow keys, and we can also use the mouse scroll wheel. By clicking in and dragging the map around, we can actually move a little bit more freely, like so. So if we want to select individual chunks, we're going to left click on them, and that will highlight them in orange, like so. If we want to deselect a chunk, you right-click on it, and that selection will disappear. You can also click and drag selections as we did earlier, so I've effectively selected my entire spawn base area if we do that, and the selection process is additive. So once a selection is there, if I make another selection, it's going to add to that, and we can highlight a huge amount of sections of the world like so. If we want to deselect that, I just hold right-click, drag across the entire area, and that selection goes away again. So here's where things get a little bit scary, because now we can highlight a section like the fisherman's cottage here, and let's say we highlight the sugarcane farm here as well, and maybe we can highlight a section of the storage system, which is probably going to cause absolute chaos when we log back into the world. But just for the sake of this example, we're going to go to selection and we're going to click on delete selected chunks. Now, this isn't hotkeyed to the delete key on your keyboard because you might be able to press that by accident. It has to be a very specific keyboard shortcut, Control-D, or you go into the selection menu and you click delete selected chunks. It will give you a warning message letting you know that you're about to delete 9 chunks from the world. We're going to hit OK, and when it reloads the area, those are going to appear as black chunks in the world. They are going to be completely unexplored chunks. And once again, I don't have to save anything about the world right now. This has been edited directly out of my Minecraft world. In fact, I'm going to close MCASelector right now. We're going to load up the survival guide world as it was, and you'll see the changes have been made. So from our select world screen here, let's load up the survival guide world. It's not going to look too different at first, but yep, some changes have already been made. Let's hop over here. You'll notice that our sugarcane farm is completely gone and replaced by the birch trees that would naturally have generated here anyway. We still have a little bit of the old sugarcane farm left because this overlapped into the neighboring chunk, and if I hit F3 and G, you can see that the chunk border is right there. So that's absolutely the chunks of the world that were being rendered in MCASelector. Our fishing shack right over there is completely gone, and of course it's raining while I demonstrate this stuff. Probably because it's really sad that I've just deleted half of my storage system. Yep, it is pretty much completely gone. The nether portal there is still intact, but a whole chunk of the storage system has pretty much vanished. And I do mean a whole chunk. Once again, the chunk borders are right here. But don't worry, folks, that's absolutely why we made a backup earlier, just so that we can restore these changes to the world after I've made them for the purposes of demonstrating that these chunks are being permanently deleted, but they're also being restored from scratch with terrain calculated by your Minecraft seeds. So it's effectively going to regenerate whatever was there when you first loaded up the world and everything was fresh and new. And having replaced that Survival Guide Season 2 world save with the backup version that we made, you can see that everything has been restored. I've put the fishing shack back in there, the sugarcane farm is where it is, and the section of our storage system is, of course, there. Because we don't want to delete anything that we've actually been working on, we want to delete all the stuff around the outside of that we haven't been using, because there is a chance that some of this could generate the deep dark biome and it could generate mangrove swamps. For example, if we go up to the north here, all around the coast nearby my Guardian farm, there is a swamp. It's this section right here with the kind of muddy water around the outside here, and that could potentially be a mangrove swamp. I haven't really built anything there right now. Obviously, it's close to the Guardian farm, but if we wanted to, we could highlight this entire section of land and delete it from the world. Because there's a chance that if we load this area up in Minecraft 1.19, the terrain would choose to put a mangrove swamp there, since it's a newer biome that's being added to Minecraft with that update. And if I wanted to, I could even load up this world seed in one of the pre-releases of Minecraft 1.19, or the full release of Minecraft 1.19 when it comes out. I could load the same exact world seed, find the areas where it generated a mangrove swamp, and just selectively delete those from my world. Let's say the game wanted to put a mangrove swamp up here where this dark oak forest is right now. All I would need to do is go in, make sure the chunks that included the mangrove swamp were highlighted, and delete those, and those would be gone from the world and ready to regenerate as a mangrove swamp when we updated our existing world to Minecraft 1.19. Incidentally, if you want an overview of what caves look like in the area, this slider on the top right-hand side of the program window is going to give you what you want, because if you drag this slider down to, let's say, 22, that's going to show you what the caves look like at Y22 in this area, which is a pretty difficult map to read, right? Unless you've made some substantial tunnels under there, for example, some sort of branch mine, then you're probably not going to see anything that you recognize all that much. There's abandoned mine shafts here and there. There are geodes, obviously, that kind of stuff. But if we head over to a few other cave environments, you'll notice that right here we clearly have a lush cave. If we take away some of the layers of terrain over here, this is where we've got our dripstone cave base set up. You can kind of see the walkways and stuff here. If I take away some of the layers, so we're at Y16, that's the copper aging setup. Wow, that looks kind of cool. It looks like something out of Factorio. And obviously below that we have the chunks of the slime farm that go pretty much all the way down to the bedrock. So as you can see, this gives us a pretty decent overview of what we're looking at cave-wise, which could help us locate some more of the deep dark biome if we wanted to do some side-by-side comparisons. But for now, let's go back to looking at our top-down overview of the world, because we could go around and painstakingly select all of the regions that we think aren't really going to be usable terrain. Like all of this stuff over here is probably not really worth it. We've been to the ice plains, but we haven't done any kind of building there. I expect a lot of this was just me looking around for desert biomes and mesa biomes and that kind of stuff. So we could select a bunch of that stuff and delete it en masse. Pretty confident that we wouldn't have anything built out there. We could probably just delete a ton of that stuff. However, MCASelector provides a bunch of tools that allow us to select things in a slightly smarter way. And for that, we're going to click on Tools and we're going to click on Filter Chunks. And it has a filter loaded in here already, and I'm not certain if this was because I've used the program before and it just saved my settings on this computer, or if this is now the default filter. But this drop-down list here is going to give us a bunch of properties for the chunks that it wants to select. And inhabited time is probably the most important one, because that is a behind-the-scenes stat that Minecraft tracks, basically tracking how long you have been in each chunk of the world. You can also select by things like biome, for example. So if we wanted to say that the biome was, let's say, Minecraft Swamp or something like that, if I run this filter now, it's going to select every swamp biome we have found in the world. And so as this works, quite clearly we can see orange sections being selected on the map where the game has generated swamps, and we know where one of those was already because it's this section all the way up here by the Guardian farm. It's not going to go any finer than individual chunks because it's not going to do things block by block, but MCASelector selected the chunk data for all of the regions which contain a swamp biome. For now though, we're going to go back to our tools filter chunks, and we're going to go back to the inhabited time filter, because this is probably the most powerful tool this thing has. If we choose the less than symbol here, and once again we type 5 minutes, what this will do when I hit OK is it's going to select all of the chunks that we have spent less than 5 minutes in. And yes, it knows what those chunks are. So if we hit OK, this is probably going to take a little bit longer than selecting all of the swamp chunks. But as you can see, it's going to select a lot of the world, because there is a substantial portion of this world that I have just flown over and loaded chunks as I went, rather than staying there and making any significant changes to them. And to be honest, at first this does seem a little scary, right? Because it's highlighted huge sections of the world that we've spent less than 5 minutes in. But if we scroll in here, you'll see that our spawn area, where we've been spending a great deal of our time, is virtually untouched, because naturally we have been spending a lot of time in the chunks in and around spawn. Likewise, up here by the Guardian farm, where I know I've spent a great deal of hours, we've spent definitely more than 5 minutes on the Guardian farm, but we've also spent a good deal more than 5 minutes in a lot of the chunks around the outside of that. That actually includes some of the chunks of the swamp down here, because that swamp is where I ended up doing a bunch of the work for episode 101, finding slimes, and we've even gone there farming slimes a couple of times, because it was the nearest decent-sized swamp to my spawn area. Up here in this mountain, you'll notice, you see the chunk there with the little pale dots in that is the mountain chunk that we mined out, and the only reason it looks like a snowy chunk, like all of the stuff around the outside of it, is because the top surface is covered in glass and snow has fallen on there. Those little individual dots are actually torches that are placed on the glass grid that's up there, preventing snow from falling further down in the chunk. We've spent a lot of time in and around the area of this desert, because that's the desert temple that I generate in when I'm coming out here to either farm sand, as you can see from these large exposed exposed patches of stone. I've been doing a fair amount of that. Or come over to the tiny little Badlands biome over there to grab hold of some terracotta or some red sand. Out here we have the woodland mansion that we've raided, which we probably don't want to regenerate. I'm actually planning on leaving that as it is, even though if we made a selection over here, we could completely regenerate that structure, and when it reloaded with the world, it would also reload all of the illagers and stuff on the inside. Here is the Snow Plains village, where we've actually set up a nether portal taking us to the frozen oceans nearby where we've been gathering packed ice. Down here is another ocean monument that I think I've raided at some stage, or at least spent a significant amount of time in. And down here in the extreme southwest corner of the world so far is the Badlands biome, where I've spent a fair amount of time harvesting terracotta and mining for gold ore. We've also got our Mushroom Island biome up here in the top half of the map. Now, from where I'm sitting, this filter looks a little bit too extreme because it's deleting a huge amount of the world, and there are some areas like here at spawn where things get a little bit patchy, right? We've got sections over here that's an ocean chunk that I haven't spent more than 5 minutes in, but let's say, for example, the deep dark biome generated under some area of spawn around here, right? Let's say it generated underneath this ocean biome. If we ended up deleting the chunks that it's selected so far, it would generate occasional 16 by 16 chunks of the deep dark biome underneath this ocean, but then in neighboring areas, there would be just normal caves, right? So effectively, this would create a really patchy looking deep dark biome if it was to generate there. And that's not my ideal case scenario for this world. I don't really want there to be just occasional chunks that end up as the deep dark. I want it to be a wide sprawling area. So what we can do is go in and manually tidy up some of these chunks, holding down right click and deselecting them so that we can make the area feel a little bit more cohesive and coherent. We want to make sure that some of the neighboring dark oak forest and jungle stays the way it is. We want to make sure that all of this stays the way it is. I still think this area around spawn deserves to be somewhat preserved. I might even go so far as to zoom out so we're looking at the region grid and deselect entire regions of the world. So at the very least, the 9 regions centered on our spawn area are preserved as far as new terrain goes. We're not going to see any deep dark or mangrove swamps generating in this area. On the flip side, this swamp over here has been explored a little bit for various bits and pieces. Obviously, we've gotten a fair amount of slime and stuff from here, but that's the only reason we've been spending time in these chunks. And so if I want to give this the opportunity to regenerate as a mangrove swamp biome, I might make a larger selection here. The one thing I'm not going to select right there is this, because that's clearly a ruined nether portal. It looks like a top-down ruined nether portal, and I don't want to regenerate the loot in there because that feels a little bit cheaty. I kind of don't want to give this the opportunity to regenerate and potentially have like some cool loot in there that I can get for a second time, right? So just for the sake of honor, I'm going to leave that chunk as it is. We do also have the option of changing our filter. So for example, we could ask it to filter the inhabited time of less than 2 minutes. This kind of filter I would expect to leave a lot more of the terrain around my spawn area untouched, because I expect I've spent around 2 minutes flying around most of the chunks in the center of my world. Although I don't know, that does look remarkably similar to the selection we had before. Once again, we can probably eliminate those chunks as something we'd want to delete, but overall this selection looks pretty similar to the less than 5 minute selection, and that once again makes me more confident that most of these are just chunks that we have flown over instead of spending any significant amount of time there. And so once again, I'm going to select all of these swamp chunks except for the chunk that has the nether portal. We're going to highlight all of those, and I think I can be pretty confident that we want to delete everything that is currently selected. Once again, let's remind ourselves that we do have a backup of this world from this point. So if anything at all goes wrong during this process, we can always revert to a backup of the world. But I think it's probably time to take a deep breath and delete 466,000 chunks from my world. This is a very large world. I've spent 6 months exploring this pretty extensively. But if I hit OK, it's going to delete those selections, and then when the map reloads, it's going to look a little different, because the world now seems to be made up of fragmented places that we have been, and darkness connects all of them. Now, once again, that is not going to have completely deleted those chunks from the world, leaving only the void behind. It is simply going to make those chunks unexplored, meaning that if we go back into those chunks now in Minecraft 1.19, there is a chance that they may have generated new terrain features that were not there in Minecraft 1.18. But if they haven't, if there aren't any deep darks or mangrove swamps nearby, they will simply generate the same terrain they had in Minecraft 1.18 because the world seed is still the same and is still following the same rules when it generates terrain. So as far as I'm concerned, this world is now ready for Minecraft 1.19. We have plenty of areas outside of our spawn point which can potentially generate new Minecraft 1.19 terrain, and I'm excited to see that stuff pop up. But let's talk about the other things you can do with MCASelector, because I expect they will prove useful to you in future. If we go to the File Open World section again, we select the Minecraft Survival Guide Season 2 world, and we hit Select Folder. It will give you the options dim-1 and dim1, once again representing the nether and the end respectively. So this means that we can apply the same treatment to the nether that we have applied to the overworld, and right now you're probably seeing that the nether in this looks a little bit weird and grey. That's because, once again, the layer we have selected up here in the top right hand corner is 319, so what we're seeing is a look at the bedrock roof. Let's change this to 64, because that's going to show us the internal view of the nether itself, and as you can see, this is looking a little more familiar. In the MCASelector window, you'll notice that in the bottom left-hand corner, we get block coordinates, chunk coordinates, and region coordinates given to us, and as we hover over different areas of the map with the mouse, those are going to change. So by doing that, we can actually locate the central region of the nether. This is region 00, and if we go in towards chunk 00, that's probably where we can expect to find some of the stuff that we built for our nether hub. And I believe, looking at this from a top-down view, that is the pathway from my nether hub that leads out past the piglin bartering setup. I think those are honey and basalt blocks in there, actually, and that's probably the section that I have built up underneath the piglin bartering farm. Let's go to 68. There we go. That right there is the piglin bartering farm. These are the pathways that I've built outwards. That pathway leads out to the dripstone cave nether portal there. That leads out to the village nether portal in the savannah there. This is all looking a lot more familiar now. We found the right level to look at this world. If we wanted to, for the sake of size or for the sake of regenerating sections of the nether in future, if they end up adding additional biomes to the nether, we could run exactly the same filter here in the nether, the inhabited time of 5 minutes probably being an accurate one, and we could hit OK, and it would highlight huge sections of the nether that we haven't spent more than 5 minutes in. Now, considering the nether is more of a transitional dimension, right? You end up going there just to pop through a portal and come out somewhere else. Chances are we might have spent time in regions of the nether that is less than 5 minutes, and so you might want to consider a slightly shorter filter in order to make sure that some sections of the nether don't just lose nether portals, right? That portals don't just pop out of existence. Since we don't actually need to worry too much about the nether, since 1.19 isn't going to make huge changes to the nether, I'm not actually going to delete any of the regions of the nether today, but in future, if you want to do that, if you want to trim down your world size for the sake of a world download or something like that, the nether can be a pretty heavily explored dimension, especially if you've been looking for specific resources or going farming for netherite, and so it's probably a good idea to know how to trim down the chunks of the nether if you need to. By returning to our open world dialogue, we can also look at dim1, which is the end, and the end is another situation in which you might want to use MCASelector to trim chunks of the world, but for kind of a different reason. You see, especially on multiplayer servers in long-term worlds, you'll find that end city loot becomes very difficult to get hold of because most of the end cities surrounding the central end island have already been explored. What long-term servers typically do, and I'll just adjust the height here so we're back up at the maximum height for the world, what long-term servers will typically do is trim the outer chunks of the end, where they can guarantee pretty much that players haven't built a great deal of stuff, but end cities have generated. Let's take a look at this eastern arm of the end, where I've clearly gone out to a couple of end cities here, claimed the elytra and the shulker boxes from these ships, and then gone on my merry way. If we want to filter the chunks of the end to something that's been inhabited for more than 5 minutes, obviously, we're going to have spent a good deal of time in and around these end cities, and I'm honestly quite surprised. I must have been raiding the end pretty fast when I was out here, but I'm surprised that I have spent less than 5 minutes in the majority of these two end cities here. Maybe if we change the filter to 1 minute, that's going to give us, even then I've spent less than a minute in some of the chunks of this end city ship and in the city around it. Well, that's quite impressive, but either way, as we can see as we go further south here, there are a bunch of explored end cities, and in the event that your server runs out of end loot and, new players can't get elytra and that kind of stuff, this might be the kind of trim you want to do, where you can select all of these end cities that are out there in the islands of the void And you can choose, once again, to completely delete them from your world. Now, one thing you will need to be aware of, and probably the most important thing about trimming a dimension like the end, is that there are bedrock gateways leading out from the end island to the outer islands of the end. And I'm not entirely certain exactly where these ones are, but of course, we've got a little bit of a scaffold built here that kind of indicates that's where one of my end gateways is, right? So if we draw a straight line from the center of the island out through that, we can probably guess that it would arrive somewhere up here. I think probably my end gateway spawns me right there. That looks like it right there, this little kind of cross shape there. These are things we want to absolutely make sure are not selected if we delete regions or chunks of the end, because if those portals are deleted, there is no way of getting them back. The game generates them by you killing the dragon, and once they have been generated for the first time, they cannot be regenerated, meaning that if you delete an end gateway portal from either the end island here or the outer islands of the end out here in the void, you're not going to get that back. And in some cases, like this one here, your end gateways may be something that you hop out of very, very quickly, and you don't spend a great deal of time there, you just spend your time flying out to some of the neighboring islands if you have Elytra already. And so as we can see here, this end gateway was selected when we did our filter. Even if we set the filter to as low as less than 1 minute spent in these chunks, you'll find that that end gateway has basically been abandoned, and if we ended up going with the selection, we would have ended up deleting that one entirely. So my general rule of thumb whenever it comes to editing the end dimension is to, yes, draw around the end cities. Get rid of those and allow those to regenerate so that you can get hold of some end loot. You may even want to delete some of the bridges that players have built out over the void to make it still feel like a more organic experience for newer players, but then completely deselect the 4 regions around the central end island to make sure that absolutely nothing is getting deleted from the island in the center of the end, and then go through and deselect all of the regions immediately surrounding that border on the end islands themselves. So if anything generates in this sort of outer ring of terrain that has the potential for one of our end gateways to generate there, you need to make sure that that stuff stays deselected. That way it won't end up getting deleted, and you won't end up with missing end gateway portals next time you decide to explore the end. Now, of course, if there is an end city somewhere in here, you can always zoom into a slightly finer view, select specifically those chunks, and have those deleted at the same time. And the game will still generate the end return gateways that take you back to the central obsidian platform on the main island. But the gateways that you get from the dragon fight are the important ones, those are the ones you want to keep, so it's important to make sure that those are not selected when you end up editing the end as a whole dimension. Once again, I'm actually not going to make any changes to the end today, because if I want to go looking for end city loot, I can pretty much just go anywhere else from the central end island. As you can see, I haven't had any gateways that generated to the west or really that far to the southwest. I've explored pretty extensively south, but there are huge areas of the end which are currently unmapped, and I've only fought the dragon 3 or 4 times, so I've only generated a couple of end gateways which I can use to get further out into the void. But as far as server admin goes, this is a really useful thing to have, especially if you have a long-term population of players who you want to keep happy with access to shulker boxes and Elytra. But now with all of that editing done, let's load Minecraft back up, and we can still safely log into the Minecraft Survival Guide world, and we could safely go out to any of the regions that we have previously explored, but I'm going to keep most of my activity today centered on spawn. I'm just going to tidy up a few things around here, just do a little bit of maintenance on some of the stuff in my world, so that when 1.19 actually arrives, I'll be able to go out and explore in new areas which may have generated new terrain. The other thing I'm going to do is make another backup, both because you can never have too many backups of your world, and to compare the sizes now that we've made these significant edits to the overworld. Okay, that took about 10 seconds to back up, and the world is now 450 megabytes on disk, and that's once again remembering that we haven't made any changes whatsoever to the nether or the end. So editing all of those chunks out of the overworld made a massive difference to the file size of the world on disk, and won't have made a significant difference to the contents of the world once we load in. If we pop in here, I should be back at spawn. Yep, I'm back here in my storage system, and no massive chunks of it have been deleted, and nothing has really been changed. But everything is about to change, and in tomorrow's episode, we should hopefully be able to go out in search of some of the new content in Minecraft 1.19. I'm hoping we find a mangrove swamp and get hold of some frogs and some new trees and lots of really exciting blocks to build with. But folks, that's where we're going to leave it for this episode of the Minecraft Survival Guide. Bit more of a technical one, but I hope you enjoyed this look at editing your world when new updates roll around. And if you have any questions, of course, you can leave them in the comments. I'll be happy to answer any questions you've got about MCASelector and how to use it. But folks, that's going to be it for this episode. Thank you so much for watching the Minecraft Survival Guide. My name has been Pixlriffs. Enjoy update day. Don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you folks soon. Take care. Bye for now.